When you're working with any database, you'll likely end up spending a certain amount of time entering and editing data. There are various ways to get information into FileMaker, and in a few cases you might import it in from a spreadsheet, a text file, or perhaps another database file. But in a majority of cases, you'll want to use the good old-fashioned method of typing it in directly, or perhaps sometimes copying and pasting from elsewhere in your computer. For the lessons so far, we've mostly been working in FileMaker's table view. So just as a reminder, in table view, you can add a new record by clicking on the plus symbol at the left of the window, just below the last row. Alternatively, you can use the new record icon in the status toolbar, or you can choose New Record from the Records menu. And you can use the keyboard shortcut, which is Command-N on macOS or Control-N on Windows. As is pretty typical of FileMaker, there are lots of different ways to achieve the same thing. When I create a new record in table view, a new row appears. The cursor is already in the first field, and you might remember that I set this table up to automatically enter serial numbers into the first field, so that's why it already has a number in it without me having had to type anything. I can now press the Tab key on the keyboard to go through the fields from left to right, entering data about another book. Once I've entered the data for a new record, we can see the data on the screen, but while the cursor is still in the record, flashing in the last field, the new record hasn't yet been saved. At this point, I have the option to choose the Revert Record command from the Records menu. If I do that, I'll cancel what I've done. In this case, choosing to revert would prevent anything on this new record from being saved, so the record would be discarded. Alternatively, to save the record, I simply have to exit it, which I can do by pressing the Enter key on the numeric keypad or by clicking outside the field area. It's important to note that the Enter key doesn't do the same thing as the Return key on the alphanumeric section of the keyboard. The Return key typically enters a carriage return if the cursor is currently in a text field in FileMaker, whereas the Enter key on the numeric keypad exits the record, committing, in other words saving, any data that's been entered or edited. After the record is exited and the data is committed, FileMaker saves the data back to disk on its own accord, a short while later, during idle time or at fixed intervals, depending on your preference settings. Now let's look at the layout in Form View. Either in Form View or List View, creating new records and entering data is essentially similar to Table View, except that of course you don't have the plus symbol at the lower left to create new records, but all the other methods I mentioned for adding a new record are still available. In this case, I'm going to add a further new record by clicking on the New Record icon in the status toolbar. Notice that the cursor is again in the first field, and as before, a serial number has been auto-entered for us. Now when I press the Tab key, just like in table mode, the cursor will move between the fields in the record, this time from top to bottom rather than left to right, allowing me to enter some new data for this record. Now I'm going to commit the record by pressing the Enter key, and as I do, the cursor will leave the last field. At this point, the record is saved and can no longer be reverted. So you'll see that the Revert Record command on the Records menu is dimmed and unavailable. Of course, as you probably noticed, I made a couple of typographical errors in entering the data for this record, so I'll need to make a few corrections. First of all, I'll use the mouse to click into the title field to place the cursor in the appropriate place to make a correction. In the same way, I can click into the Publisher field and make a correction there. Now when I press the Enter key again, the changes are saved or committed and the cursor is again removed from the record's fields. So I now have a new record that was first entered and then subsequently edited in two separate procedures. Now I'd like to create a third new record, which I'll do by pressing Command-N on the keyboard. Remember that if you're on Windows, the corresponding keyboard command is Control-N. As before, the cursor is already in the first field, and a serial number has been created. This time, if you'll bear with me for a moment, I'll deliberately enter some text into the wrong field so we can experiment with moving the data between fields to see how that works. Also, before putting this text into the correct field, I'll first apply some text formatting to it to demonstrate another interesting data entry feature. Now when I select the text and choose Cut from the Edit menu, the text, formatting and all, is placed on the clipboard. And if I click into the title field, Of course, I can paste the text back in. As far as that goes, cut, copy and paste work in FileMaker in much the same way as in other applications. And of course, you can copy text from other applications such as a word processor or a web browser and paste it into a FileMaker field. Now I'll delete the title so we can try something else. With the cursor still in the title field, if, instead of choosing the paste command, I choose the paste text only command, FileMaker places just the text into the field without the formatting. If you're bringing text into FileMaker from another application, it's generally quite a good idea to use paste text only rather than just paste, to be sure you will only get the text, since formatting is most likely redundant and may be problematic in a database. Another option to remove formatting is to paste normally and then immediately choose the undo command. FileMaker gives you a two-step undo process, with the first use of the undo command undoing only the formatting. Let's take a look. First I'll paste normally, and now you'll see that on the edit menu the undo command has changed to undo formatting. And I can return the text to its plain format using the undo command. A second use of the undo command would now undo the paste action. So using the undo command is another way you can achieve the desired outcome of getting just the text into the field without any embedded character formatting. Before continuing, I'll just take a moment to complete the data in this 15th record. Notice that when I now click into a field or tab into a field that contains a word that FileMaker doesn't find in its reference dictionary, in this case co, the word is underlined with a red dotted line. If I right-click on the underlined word, the contextual menu appears and includes a suggested spellings option. This behaviour depends not only on the file options setting we saw in the previous lesson, but also on the settings applied to the field in layout mode. That is, the spell check feature can be disabled for fields where it won't be useful. We'll look at that in greater detail in a later chapter. For now, before continuing to the next lesson, you might like to open your copy of the work file provided with this lesson, Workfile 3, and try adding some records of your own, editing them, reverting them, and committing them so you can get comfortable with the processes I've just demonstrated.